Alone in the woods. Horror stories of survival and fear. Story 1. The Whispering Shadows. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about the silence of the forest that allowed me to clear my mind. It was the kind of solitude that made me feel connected to the world, grounded in a way that city life never could. Yet, as I walked deeper into the woods that day, I began to sense that something was off. This hike was supposed to be like the others, a simple escape from everyday stress, a quick retreat to reset my mind. But the further I ventured, the more unsettling it became. It was late afternoon when I realized how quiet the forest had become. The usual rustle of leaves in the wind was absent. The chirping of birds seemed distant, as though they were avoiding this part of the woods. The trees seemed taller now, thicker, their gnarled branches twisting into shapes that almost resembled outstretched hands. There was no breeze. The air was unnervingly still, and the path, which had been well trodden at first, was now overgrown and faint. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 6 o'clock. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the trail. I should have been heading back by now, but the trail was supposed to loop around the ridge and bring me back to the parking lot, or at least, that's what I thought. I hadn't seen any trail markers for what felt like ages. Panic began to gnaw at the edges of my mind as I reached for my phone, only to realize I had no service. The screen stared back at me, blank and useless. I was alone in the wilderness, with no way to contact anyone or find my bearings. I pushed the rising sense of unease down, determined to stay calm. The forest had always been a place of peace for me, a place to escape the noise of everyday life. But as the shadows grew longer and the silence pressed in around me, the sense of peace began to erode. The woods felt wrong. It was as if they were watching me. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft, barely audible at first, like a fleeting breath of wind rustling the leaves. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. The sound had come from the trees, from somewhere behind me. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. No person, no animal, nothing at all. My breath hitched in my throat, and I stood frozen, staring into the gathering darkness. I continued walking, my pace quickening as I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. But the whisper came again. This time, it was louder. "Turn back." The voice was eerily familiar, as if it was speaking directly into my mind, not just my ears. I turned, looking around frantically, but there was no one there. The forest seemed too still, too alive in its silence. My skin prickled as the words echoed in my mind. I kept moving, faster now, the urgency of my footsteps quickening, but the whispers followed me. "Turn back, turn back." They grew sharper, more insistent, and with each repetition, I could feel the weight of them pressing against my chest, suffocating me. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, my heart hammering, my breath ragged and frantic. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I winced as I scraped my arms on the jagged rocks beneath me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The whispers were closing in, relentless, like an invisible force following my every step. My hands trembled as I pushed myself back to my feet and forced myself to keep moving, even as panic surged in my chest. As I rounded a sharp bend in the trail, I saw it. A shadow darting between the trees. It moved too quickly, too unnaturally fast, almost as if it were gliding through the woods. "Turn back." The voice was no longer a whisper, but a command, clear and authoritative. It came from the shadow itself, from the very air around me, and it filled me with an overwhelming sense of terror. I had to get away. I ran harder, my legs burning with exhaustion, my mind clouded with fear. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the trail becoming more difficult, more treacherous. The trees seemed to close in on either side, narrowing the path until it felt like I was running through a maze. I had to get out, but I couldn't see where I was going. The air was thick, the night settling in faster than I could have imagined. I tripped again, this time tumbling forward, my face hitting the cold earth. The wind was knocked from my lungs and I gasped for air, my hands scrambling against the ground. When I finally managed to push myself up, I realized something even more terrifying. The trail, the one that had been leading me back to safety, was gone. There were no markers, no familiar landmarks. The trees had closed in around me, forming a dense barrier that I couldn't see through. I was lost. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. "Turn back!" It was maddening, the sound of it echoing in my head, drowning out all rational thought. My heart raced in my chest, my body trembling with fear. I tried to move, to find my way back, but every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the forest. The shadows stretched longer, swallowing up the light, until the darkness was absolute. I felt the weight of the voices pressing down on me, pulling at my sanity. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were a chorus, a relentless chant that echoed through my mind. "Turn back, turn back, turn back." The words wrapped around me, filling my thoughts with terror, with confusion. I didn't know what was real anymore. That's when I heard it, the snap of a twig behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Deliberate, slow, purposeful. Someone, or something, was following me. I spun around, my pulse skyrocketing. But there was nothing there, just the trees, the thick darkness, and the whispers still pressing against my ears. But then, something caught my eye. A figure, standing just beyond the trees. It was barely visible, just a shadow against the blackness. But I knew it was watching me. I couldn't breathe, my limbs locked in place, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refused to obey. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. I could feel the darkness swallowing me whole, pulling me toward it, toward the thing that was waiting for me in the shadows. Suddenly, a flash of light, bright, blinding, illuminated the figure. I staggered back, my heart racing, unable to process what was happening. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself in the harsh light. It was a woman, but not a normal woman. Her eyes were hollow, black as coal, her mouth twisted into a smile that stretched unnaturally wide. The whispers grew louder, overlapping with her voice as she spoke. "You should have turned back. I couldn't move. I couldn't think." She reached out, her fingers brushing the air, and in that moment, I knew I was about to be consumed by the very forest that had once given me peace. The shadows were alive, they were closing in, and I was trapped. Just as her fingers touched my arm, the world around me erupted in chaos. The light from nowhere flickered, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and I felt myself being pulled backward into the shadows. I awoke on the forest floor, gasping for air, covered in cold sweat. The woods were silent again, too quiet. The figure was gone. The whispers ceased. My phone still had no signal, the trail still missing. But in the distance, I saw a faint glimmer of light. I stumbled toward it, desperately hoping it was a way out. But the whispers followed me, still faint, still distant, still haunting. And deep in my chest, a voice echoed, louder than all the rest. "You should have turned back." Story 2. The Unseen Tracker. I had always considered myself a seasoned outdoorsman, the kind of guy who thrived in the wild. who knew how to navigate the forest with nothing but the equipment strapped to his back and the land beneath his boots. Over the years, I'd spent countless weekends in the wilderness of Montana, exploring its deep, untouched corners. I'd learned to read the signs of nature, the weather, and the terrain. But something about this particular hike felt different right from the start. It was supposed to be a straightforward day trip, a few hours of hiking in the northern woods of Montana, a bit of solitude, and then back to the campsite before dark. I had planned it all meticulously, a short loop trail that would bring me back to my starting point. Simple. I knew the terrain well, and I had done it all before. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. But as I crossed a narrow stream, something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, a slight disturbance in the dirt, a print. At first, I dismissed it, thinking it was just an animal track. But when I bent closer, I realized what it was. The footprint was unmistakable. Human. But not just any human footprint. It was barefoot, large, and the marks were fresh. The edges of the prints were still slightly damp, as though they had been made just minutes before I arrived. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and the wind had shifted to a cold, biting gust that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I looked around, searching for any sign of other hikers, but there was nothing. No other campsites, no gear, no abandoned backpack or water bottle. Just the faint, mysterious trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. The trees here were thick, their branches twisted in unnatural ways, blocking out most of the light. The shadows grew longer as I stood there, contemplating whether I should keep going. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity and a bit of my stubbornness won out. I followed the prints, my boots crunching through the underbrush as I moved deeper into the woods. With each step, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was a strange sensation, the feeling of eyes on me, watching me from the shadows. At first, I brushed it off as the anxiety of being out in the wilderness alone, but the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger with each passing minute. Every few steps, I would glance over my shoulder, convinced someone was behind me, though I saw nothing. The woods, usually full of life and sound, were deathly still. No birds chirped, no squirrels darted through the trees. The forest felt empty, like it was holding its breath. By the time the sun began to dip low on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, the air had grown colder, and I realized I had made a mistake. The light was fading fast, and the trail was getting harder to follow. The prints, which had once seemed so clear, had started to blur, as if the forest itself was trying to erase them. I reached a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. There was no one there. The prints had led me to an open space, the trees forming a perfect circle around it. I was standing alone, in the center of an empty clearing, surrounded by the darkening woods. The forest, once so inviting and familiar, now felt hostile, as though it had swallowed me whole. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, and I felt the overwhelming sense that I was not alone, that someone or something was lurking just beyond the trees, waiting. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to retrace my steps and leave the woods before darkness fully descended. But when I started to move, I froze. There, at the edge of the clearing, standing motionless in the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence. It was watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen in place, my pulse hammering in my ears. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, as if it were waiting for something. waiting for me to make the next move. I took a step back, then another, but no matter how I moved, the figure remained at the edge of the trees, never leaving my sight. It was too far away for me to make out any details, but I could tell it wasn't just a trick of the light. It wasn't an animal or a shadow. It was a person. Or at least, it looked like one. I started to walk faster, but the figure's presence stayed with me, as if it were moving with me, matching my every step. I quickened my pace, but the faster I moved, the closer the figure seemed to get. It wasn't chasing me, but it was always just on the periphery of my vision. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran, the sound of my boots pounding against the forest floor ringing in my ears. I didn't look back. I just ran, straight through the dense woods, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees blurred around me as I pushed myself forward, faster than I had ever run in my life, my fear driving me to keep going. I didn't stop until I hit the main trail, the familiar path that would lead me back to camp. But even as I ran, even as I felt the safety of the trail beneath me, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It followed me. When I reached my camp, I was shaking, drenched in sweat, my heart still racing from the terror that had gripped me in the forest. I collapsed by the fire, trying to calm myself, trying to make sense of what had happened. I checked my boots for any signs of the strange footprints, but there was nothing. No dirt from the forest floor, no twigs caught in the laces. Then I looked at my feet. The prints on the ground beneath me were fresh. They weren't mine. The trail had circled back. Someone had been following me the entire time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, watching the dark trees, waiting for the figure to appear again. But it never did. The silence in the woods felt deafening, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat. The next morning, I packed up and left the campsite. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. They wouldn't have believed me. But as I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road, watching me. The figure, the tracker, had been waiting for me, and now I knew it was out there, always watching, always waiting. Whoever or whatever it was, I knew it wasn't finished with me. The forest had a way of keeping its secrets, and I had a feeling that my encounter was just the beginning. Story 3. The Hollow Footsteps. I had always enjoyed the solace that came with hiking alone. The steady rhythm of my boots crunching against the earth, the fresh scent of pine, and the serene silence. It was all I needed to escape the noise of everyday life. For hours, I had been walking through the dense woods, each step taking me deeper into the heart of the forest. It had started as a peaceful solo trip, one I had planned carefully, aiming to disconnect from the chaos of city life. I wanted to recharge, to find clarity, but the further I ventured, the more I began to feel like something was wrong. It wasn't immediately obvious, but slowly it crept in. The forest, which had once seemed welcoming, began to feel oppressive. The trees, tall and dense, crowded around me, blocking the sun's warmth and turning the air thick and heavy. The deeper I went, the less the forest felt like nature and more like something else, something watching. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks, but the feeling didn't go away. The trail, once clear and well marked, started to thin out. I had planned on a short hike that would loop me back to the camp before dark, but now the path was barely visible beneath the thick underbrush. My feet sank into the soft earth, and the air was starting to feel stale, like I was breathing in the humidity of a long-forgotten swamp. I didn't want to admit it, but I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but it seemed like the woods were changing with each turn, each step I took. The trees were growing more twisted, the foliage thicker. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. The familiar sounds of the forest, the birds chirping, the breeze rustling through the leaves, were gone, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Then I heard it. The sound wasn't immediate, but it grew louder as I walked on. A soft, hollow sound, like something heavy dragging across the dirt. At first I thought it was an animal, a bear, or perhaps a large deer. But when I stopped and listened more carefully, the sound felt wrong. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. The dragging sound was not the shuffle of paws or hooves, but the unmistakable sound of feet, human feet. I froze. My breath hitched in my chest. The footsteps, the dragging sound, were getting closer. But when I turned around, there was nothing. The forest was still. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a sudden chill despite the warm afternoon. It was then I noticed the footprints in the dirt. They were deep but uneven, like something or someone had been dragging their feet along the ground. I knelt down to examine them, my fingers brushing against the rough earth. The prints were fresh, almost too fresh, as if someone had been here moments ago. But as I traced the path of the footprints with my eyes, I realized something unsettling. They didn't lead anywhere. They simply stopped. No return path, no sign of where the person had gone, or where they had come from. My chest tightened. I stood up and looked around. The trees now seemed darker, more oppressive, and the thickening shadows made it difficult to gauge just how much light was left. Panic began to rise in my chest. How long had I been walking? How far had I gone? I checked my phone, but as expected, there was no signal. The familiar sense of safety I had come to associate with hiking alone was quickly replaced with an overwhelming sense of dread. I decided to turn back, retracing my steps, trying to follow the faint trail I had come from. But the woods had changed. They weren't the same. The trees twisted in strange, unnatural directions. The path was no longer visible, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. The forest was closing in on me. I was trapped. Then it came again. The hollow dragging sound, the footsteps. They were behind me now, unmistakable, growing louder, slow and deliberate. I could feel them closing in. My heart pounded in my chest, and I turned, half expecting to see someone standing just beyond the trees, but there was nothing. The forest was silent again, except for the dragging footsteps that seemed to follow my every move. I tried to walk faster, but the footsteps didn't stop. They followed me, always just out of sight, but so close now that I could almost feel them. Each drag across the dirt sent a shiver down my spine, and I found myself breathing faster, more erratically. I wanted to run, but a part of me was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what I was running from. Then I did run. I pushed myself harder, crashing through the underbrush, ignoring the sting of branches against my skin. My breath was shallow, my legs aching, but I didn't stop. The footsteps grew louder, and now I could hear the soft wheeze of someone struggling to breathe, like they were too weak to run, but too determined to stop. It was slow, labored, and I could feel it closing in, just behind me. I ran without looking back. The trail, once faint, had completely disappeared. I was running blindly now, hoping that something, anything, would break through the darkness. The shadows around me seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the path I had once thought I knew so well. Finally, I burst into a clearing, the familiar campfire smoke rising from the nearby campsite. I stumbled forward, collapsing to the ground, gasping for breath, my body shaking from exhaustion and terror. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, I thought I had escaped whatever had been following me, whatever was out there in the woods. I lay there, on the edge of the clearing, trying to steady my breath. But the silence that surrounded me was deafening. The air felt too still, like it was holding its breath. I looked around, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. From the edge of the trees, just beyond the dim light of the fire, a shadow shifted. It was fleeting, but it was there. I couldn't make out any details, but I felt its presence, standing in the darkness, watching me. My heart began to race again, the fear creeping back into my chest. The footsteps hadn't stopped. They were still there, still watching me from the trees, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire burning brightly, the flames crackling and popping in the silence. Each rustle of the wind, each snap of a twig sent my pulse spiking. I couldn't relax. My mind was consumed with what I had heard, with what had been following me through the forest. I wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of civilization, but the woods, they had already taken too much. The shadow was still out there, waiting, and I was starting to realize that it wasn't just the footsteps that haunted me. It was the feeling that I was being stalked by something that wasn't human. Something that was just as much a part of the forest as the trees themselves. The next morning, I left as quickly as I could. I didn't stop to pack everything. I just grabbed what I could and ran. But even now, as I look back at the woods in the rearview mirror, I can still hear it. The hollow footsteps. They were never far behind, and I know they're still waiting, somewhere in the trees. Story 4. The Lost Reflection. I had always been the type of person who found solace in the forgotten places, the abandoned, the overgrown, and the neglected. They held a particular kind of charm for me, a whisper of mystery, an untouched stillness. When I stumbled across a rumor of an old trail that led to a secluded lake deep within the forest, I couldn't resist. The thought of finding a peaceful, hidden spot, a place no one had bothered to disturb, was too tempting, a perfect escape from the world. I packed my bag the night before, checked my gear, and set off at first light. The air was crisp, the sky barely breaking with the glow of the early sun. It was a trek I'd read about only briefly, something whispered in hushed tones at the local diner, a trail that had faded into obscurity over time, the kind of place that only the truly adventurous sought out. I was ready. The path started off narrow, barely a footpath winding its way through the thick woods. Branches reached down like skeletal fingers, pulling at my clothes, the ground thick with moss-covered rocks and tangled thorns. As the hours passed, I moved deeper into the forest. The trail was treacherous, but that only added to the allure. The further I went, the more disconnected I felt from civilization. By midday, I reached the lake, a small, serene body of water nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The surface was smooth as glass, reflecting the sky and trees like a perfect mirror. It was beautiful, exactly what I had hoped for. I set down my pack by the shore, taking in the peace of the place. The air was still, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment, I allowed myself to just breathe, to relax in the solitude. But as I stared into the lake, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just my tired reflection, distorted slightly by the gentle ripple of the water. But as I leaned closer, the shape of my face became clearer, and something felt off. My face, reflected in the water, looked wrong. It wasn't an exact mirror image. My features were slightly different. The angles of my face altered, my expression unfamiliar. But it wasn't just that. My reflection smiled. I hadn't smiled. I froze, heart thudding in my chest. I leaned in closer, the water still and silent, except for the faint rustle of the trees around me. The smile in the reflection widened, stretching unnaturally across my face. The grin was far too wide, far too eerie, and for a moment I couldn't tear my eyes away. It lingered, frozen, while my own face remained motionless in confusion. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the reflection's smile turned into a twisted, mocking grin, its eyes glimmering with something dark, something malicious. I pulled away in shock, stumbling backward, but I couldn't look away from the water. I took another step back, my feet slipping on the slick rocks near the edge of the lake, and that's when I realized the path I had come from was gone. The trees had shifted. The once familiar way back was no longer visible. It was as though the forest itself had changed, closing in around me. I spun around, desperate to find a way out, but the trees were too thick, the branches twisting in unnatural shapes, blocking the sunlight. The clearing that had once been a peaceful sanctuary was now an oppressive prison. The lake, once a mirror of tranquility, had become something far more sinister. It felt as though the water itself was no longer a reflection of the world I knew, but a portal to something else. I was trapped. I turned in circles, searching for any sign of the path, but the forest only seemed to grow darker, more unfamiliar. That's when I heard it, a voice. Soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. It's too late. My heart stopped. The voice sounded exactly like mine. Distorted, hollow, but undeniably mine. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me, echoing through the trees. My breath caught in my throat, and I spun around again, but there was no one there, no one to be seen, only the endless, twisting forest and the still, cold lake that reflected nothing but the shadows, the water. I turned back to the lake, my legs unsteady, as I stumbled closer. The reflection was there again, but this time, it was no longer just a mirror of my own face. It was me, but not me. The reflection was moving, its eyes never leaving mine, its grin still wide, stretching further than any human smile should. It wasn't me, not anymore. The face in the water seemed to take on a life of its own, shifting with dark intent. And then I saw it. Behind me, in the trees, something moving. A figure, cloaked in shadow. It was watching me. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see it clearly. Something ancient, something not quite human. I turned, my body trembling, but there was nothing there. The forest had swallowed it up. I tried to back away from the water, but the reflection's eyes followed me, its grin widening. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I felt a tremor, subtle at first, but growing stronger. The trees around me began to sway, their branches twisting like fingers reaching out, pulling the world closer to the lake. The air thickened, almost choking me, as if I was no longer breathing the same air. I turned again, hoping to find some escape, but this time I couldn't see the path at all. There was no way out. The forest had trapped me in its web, and the reflection in the water was no longer just a reflection. It had crossed over. It had become something else. The water rippled, and I saw something reach out from the depths. A hand, my hand, I screamed, stumbling back in terror. But the hand reached out faster than I could react, dragging me forward. I tried to pull away, but the force was too strong. I could feel my reflection's grip on me, its cold fingers wrapping around my wrist, pulling me closer. The water felt freezing, as though it was drawing the warmth from my body, the cold seeping deep into my bones. Panic surged through me as I tried to escape, but I couldn't. The reflection in the water wasn't letting go. It was pulling me into the depths, the world around me spinning faster and faster. Then, just as quickly as it began, everything stopped. The water stilled. The trees stopped moving. The oppressive silence returned. I was still standing on the shore of the lake, drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. But the path, the one I had come down, was still gone. The trees around me seemed to pulse with an unnatural life, their dark silhouettes stretching higher than I remembered.
And the reflection, it was gone.
But I knew it wasn't over. I knew that it was still out there, watching, waiting for me. The thing in the water, the thing that wasn't quite me.
As I turned to leave, I heard the voice again, soft but clear. It's too late.
And I realized then that the reflection had never really left me. It was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to return.